They said it was probably a wolf, he told me, or maybe a bear that wandered north. Something natural, something easy to explain. I couldn't believe it. What about the hand? I asked him, desperate for an answer. He froze, the color draining from his face. That hand never made it back to the station, he said quietly. The officer who had it? His car swerved off the road, straight into a tree. He died on impact. And the hand, it was gone. The official story was that an animal must have taken it. The cops, when they even acknowledged the hand at all, dismissed it as a bare paw that just looked a little too human. That was the last real conversation I had with the landlord. Not long after I left for basic training, he disappeared. No trace. The local authorities claimed he owed money to the wrong people and skipped town, but I didn't buy it. It didn't feel that simple. I never went back to those woods. Not then, not ever. I wouldn't go back, even if I had the entire U.S. Army at my back. That was my father's story about the thing in the woods, the rake, the skinwalker, whatever it was. I still don't know what to make of it. As I grew older, though, and after my mother passed away, I noticed something change in my father. It was like he had nothing left to lose. He stopped caring about himself, about anything. And then one day, he decided to go back into those woods. I begged him not to, but he didn't listen. He never came back. The FBI showed up, put on their little show, and went through the motions, but I knew they weren't really looking. They never found him, and I don't think they ever really wanted to. I'm in the back, folding pizza boxes like a good little worker, when the counter girl walks over with a delivery slip. She looks at me and says, "This guy on the phone sounded weird, like he was talking through a fan or cupping his hands over his mouth. He was even kind of gurgling." Immediately, my experiences in Washington, D.C. kick in, and I assume it's probably some drug user. You know the type. Around here, though, it's more likely a benzo freak than anything else. My expectations for this delivery are already low. I glance at the address and realize it's basically in the middle of nowhere. Fantastic. Not exactly thrilled about the long drive, I mutter something under my breath, but figure I'll just deal with it. Then I notice the order itself, and it's easily the weirdest ticket I've ever seen. The guy ordered a large pizza, but the toppings list was insane. Anchovies, ground beef, ham, sausage, pepperoni, you name it. A solid $15 worth of extras piled on top of one pizza. Confused, I go to ask the counter girl if this order was correct. She shrugs and says she thinks so, but admits she couldn't really understand the guy on the phone. "I just did my best," she says. To be fair, she's only 16, so I cut her some slack. Maybe she was daydreaming while taking the call. Still, something feels off. So I decide to call the customer back, just to confirm the order. I dial the number, and it rings. 5 times, 10 times, 20, 30. But no one answers. Weird. I hang up and call again, but this time I get the automated message. "The number you have dialed does not have a voicemail box set up yet. Goodbye." Okay, then. At this point, my manager shrugs and says we'll just make the pizza as ordered and figure it out when I deliver it. No big deal, right? Meanwhile, I head out to deliver another order. A pretty standard run. First stop is a hilariously big guy and his friends, followed by a couple who invite me in for drinks. Nice folks, but I have a rule. No drinking or smoking while I'm working. I was hoping that by the time I got back, the mystery of the strange order would have resolved itself. Someone else ended up delivering that weird pizza order, but surprise, surprise, no one answered. Now it was my turn again to pick up a new delivery. And of course, it was to the same address. Begrudgingly, I grab the pizza, hop into my car, and punch the address into my phone. The location is on a side street next to a local park everyone calls open space. Ironically, it's not open at all. It's about 500 acres of dense woods. The place is on the very edge of our delivery range, roughly 25 minutes away. I crank up some dubstep and let my turbo Subaru do its thing as I head out. If you've never driven through rural areas in the winter, let me paint the picture for you. It's unsettling. The woods are dead silent, so any sound, no matter how small, feels like something big is creeping up on you. After what feels like forever, I finally reach the street. The houses here are spread out, each sitting on at least 5 acres of land. I'm looking for number 1134. I pass 1130, and then nothing. Just an empty stretch of road. A few minutes later, the numbers pick up again at 1144. What the heck? I just want to get this over with and move on to the next delivery without worrying about some drugged-out weirdo jumping me for a pizza. I try calling the number again. It rings and rings before suddenly stopping. Wait, did someone pick up? But instead of a voice, I hear this weird buzzing or humming sound. It's faint at first, but gets louder and louder until it's blasting through my car speakers. Panicking, I hang up. I'm not about to let my speakers get fried. By now, the windows of my car are fogging up. I pull over between 2 houses to clear them, but when I roll down the window, I'm hit with the most rancid smell imaginable. It's like rotting trash, a stench so bad it reminds me of driving through Newark, New Jersey. I gag, throw the car into first gear, and pull forward to escape the smell. Ahead, I spot a house at the end of a driveway with a small stone pillar and a light on top. Perfect. Maybe I've got the wrong address, and this is the place. It makes sense. Rural areas are full of weird mix-ups. As I get closer, about 100 feet from the driveway, I see someone step out of the darkness and into the light. Relief washes over me. Finally, someone's here. Maybe this will be quick. I spot the guy who ordered the pizza and immediately brace myself for something weird. I expect him to be staggering around, acting totally out of his mind, but he's surprisingly calm, too calm. I stop my car about 10 feet away from him, keeping my headlights on. He's standing there under a dim light, wearing this enormous black coat that looks 3 sizes too big. Even so, he's huge, at least 5 inches taller than me. I grab the pizza and step out of the car, carefully pulling out the ticket and some change just in case he's paying with cash. I call out to him, trying to keep things casual. Hey sir, sorry about the wait. And all the calls, this one's pretty far out. Nothing, no response. The red flags start piling up. The smell in the air is awful, so pungent it feels like it's sticking to my skin. And it's definitely not trash day. I place the pizza on the roof of my car and glance at him more closely. He's just standing there, perfectly still under the light. Now that I'm paying attention, I get a good look at him. The guy is massive, barefoot, with ripped up jeans that are covered in stains. The coat hangs off him like it doesn't belong, and his feet are dirty and pale. I try to look at his face. His eyes, something's wrong. They're sunken, almost hidden in shadow, and the light doesn't seem to catch any pupils. It's like staring into black craters. I'm officially creeped out. He still hasn't moved, hasn't said a word. My instincts tell me something's very wrong. I stop what I'm doing and just stare at him. He stares back, and his head starts moving, but not in a natural way. It's bobbing side to side, jerking like a car door that stops halfway open and needs another shove to fully close. The movements are erratic, with no rhythm, and I feel a chill creep down my spine. For about 10 seconds, I stand there frozen, completely unnerved by his movements. The stench, and those empty eyes. My brain is screaming at me to leave, but I can't move. Without breaking eye contact, I slowly pull my phone out of my pocket. I hold it up near the roof of the car so I can keep one eye on the guy while I glance at my screen. Something doesn't add up, and my curiosity gets the better of me. I go to my recent calls and redial the number from the order. It starts ringing, but I don't hear a phone ringing nearby. Wait, no, I do. Faintly. But it's not coming from a house or anywhere inside. It's coming from him. Emerging from the stillness of the woods, I suddenly hear the faint, distant sound of a cell phone ringing. It's about 50 yards away, deeper into the trees. My stomach twists as I realize where it's coming from. The guy is still standing there, under the light, his head doing that unsettling bobbing motion. But now, I swear, he's smiling. I finally manage to speak, my voice shaky. Can you, come get this? Also, I think you might have dropped your phone or something when you were, hiding a body in the woods. I laugh nervously, trying to mask my growing dread. Maybe he's just high, I think. Just some guy who's taken way too many pills. Then he moves. His mouth opens, but his head keeps that eerie, jerky bobbing. A sound comes out, a low, guttural grunt, followed by a higher one, then back to low. They're soft and quick, almost like someone clearing their throat. I'm gripping the roof of my car now, trying not to panic. My hand inches toward the driver's side door, ready to jump in and floor it, but before I can move, I hear him speak. That phone's not mine. The way he says it sends chills down my spine. There's a pause, too long, between the words, phone's not, and mine. The first part runs together, almost as if it's one slurred word, while the word mine comes out higher, sharper, like a knife cutting through the air. My brain is screaming at me, DEFCON 5, get out. My knees are trembling, and I'm on the verge of passing out from sheer terror. Desperate to end this nightmare, I slide the pizza to the far edge of my car's roof, as far from me as possible. Sir, I manage, my voice cracking, you're freaking me out. I've got a 45 and less than $20 on me. Just take this so I can leave. The moment I say that, his head stops bobbing, dead still. His eyes, black and hollow, lock onto mine. They feel like they're burning straight through me. Then he opens his mouth again. It. The word hangs in the air, sharp and menacing. What? I stammer, barely able to get the word out. It was his. The words come slowly, deliberately. I feel frozen in place, unable to move as he starts walking toward my car. The figure jerked forward, not like a step, but like a single violent spasm that propelled him closer to the car. The phone was his, he repeated, his voice cold and mechanical. I was on the verge of tears. My body felt paralyzed with fear, but my instincts screamed at me to move. Then he jerked again, this time stopping just a few feet from the car. Phone's not his anymore. I stammered, unable to form words, before finally mustering a scream. I'm gonna call the cops, man. Just leave me alone. The man smiled, if you could even call it that. His mouth didn't move, but somehow I heard a voice. It wasn't his voice. It wasn't like anything I'd ever heard before. Go away. Stop following me. I will call the police, the voice said, flat and unnervingly calm. Before I could react, he made another jerky motion, reaching for the pizza on the roof of my car. He grabbed it, and with one spastic motion, placed a couple of round objects on the roof where the pizza had been. Quarters. They were wet, surrounded by a dark liquid that started spreading across the car's roof. I didn't think. I didn't stop to process. I just dove into my car, slammed it into gear, and peeled out, leaving the hot sleeve for the pizza, the quarters, everything. I didn't even close the door all the way as I sped down the road, hitting 80 miles per hour within seconds. About a quarter mile down, I forced myself to stop. My sense of direction told me I'd get even more lost if I kept going. Heart racing, I whipped the car into a U-turn and sped back toward the spot where the encounter had happened. When I passed the place, he was gone. Relief washed over me briefly, but it didn't last. I reached the end of the road and slowed down at the stop sign to merge onto the main road. As I checked to the right, everything seemed clear. But when I turned left, I nearly screamed. His face. It was right there, just inches from my window, staring directly at me. His sunken, empty eyes and that twisted smile burned into my brain. My body reacted before my mind could catch up. I floored it, the tires screeching as I sped off down the main road, leaving him behind. When I finally reached the pizza place, I was shaking so badly I could barely stand. For the first time ever while working, I stepped outside to smoke just to calm my nerves. When I walked back inside, the girl at the counter looked at me with confusion. "Hey," she said, "that guy at the open space house just called back. He said he forgot some food, but he only ordered the pizza, right? He wants you to go back." I felt my knees buckle. My hands trembled as I pulled my phone from my pocket. It had flown across the car during my panicked escape. When I unlocked it, I saw 14 missed calls, all from his number. I opened the voicemail inbox, dreading what I might hear. All but one of the messages were empty. But the last one, it was breathing. Ragged, unnatural breathing. And then came those guttural, low grunting noises. I broke down, sobbing in front of everyone, not even caring how ridiculous I looked. For the next 10 minutes, I sat in a daze, trying to calm myself down. But deep down, I knew one thing for certain. I was never going back to that house. I still remember the change he left on the roof. It was strange, unsettling. I stepped outside, making my way to the car and flicked on the flashlight. The roof of the car was covered in some thick, viscous fluid, something between syrup and oil, but it smelled like copper. The stench hit me so hard I gagged, my stomach twisting. Then I noticed the gap between the trunk and the rear window. In that narrow space I saw them. Quarters. They were stuck to the metal, covered in that same nasty sticky goo. And there was something else. A soft, small piece of tissue, almost like skin. My heart stopped. I rushed to open the car door. That's when I saw it. A trail of that fluid, a single line running from the front quarter panel to the driver's side door. My mind raced, and I felt my skin crawl. That thing, it had tried to open my door. It was right next to me when I was at that stop sign. It was trying to get in. I couldn't hold it together anymore. I went back inside, tears streaming down my face. I begged the girl at the counter to try calling the number again for me. She dialed over and over, but each time it went straight to voicemail. The next morning, I handed the number to my uncle. He's a police captain a few towns over. He ran it through their system. The number was a burner phone, paid for in cash, virtually untraceable. And now, it's turned off. I haven't been able to sleep in the dark since. I keep the lights on at all times. Every creak in the floor, every shadow in the corner of my room, I can't shake the feeling that whatever happened that night, my father once told me a story I'll never forget. Not just because it was the first story he ever told me as a child, or because it was about how my grandfather died. No, it stuck with me for an entirely different reason. You hear stories on TV, in passing conversations, or even in crowded places. People talk about ghosts, aliens, or strange creatures, and your first instinct is to dismiss it. That can't be real, you think. They're exaggerating, mistaken, or maybe even crazy. It's easy to ignore these tales until something happens, something that ties everything together in a way you can't ignore. Maybe it happens to you, or maybe you hear the same story repeated by different people in different places. Suddenly the world feels much bigger than you once thought. This is one of those stories. It's what my father told me, and though he swore it was true, I didn't believe him. Not at first. It wasn't until I stumbled across other stories, eerily similar ones, that I started to reconsider. As I clicked through the internet, I realized I wasn't alone in hearing about it. The tale of the rake started to haunt me, just as it had haunted others. Of course, my father didn't call it the rake. He's never used the internet, wouldn't know what name it's come to be known by. When he did give it a name other than just it or that thing, he called it Skinwalker, borrowing from an old Navajo legend his grandfather had once told him. But let me tell you the story exactly as my father told it to me. It all began on a hunting trip late one night. We used to hunt coyotes for $50 a skin. Back then, we lived on a dairy farm in Ohio, and times were tough. Sometimes we'd even have to kill a calf to make ends meet. We'd head out every night because we needed the money. Occasionally, we'd come across a deer, and taking it down meant feeding our family for a few days. It wasn't something our landlord minded, and it saved us some cash. One night, we were finishing our rounds and heading home. We walked everywhere since we didn't have a car or a four-wheeler back then. We cut through the woods like usual. That's when we stumbled upon it. Blood. Everywhere. It was splattered on the trees, pooled in the grass, staining the creek. At first, we figured it was a pack of coyotes. Sometimes they'd scavenge, and if they got desperate enough, they'd hunt deer or cattle. The worst was when they bred with feral dogs. They'd become bold and unpredictable. But this wasn't anything like that. When a pack of coyotes, wolves, or even dogs hunt, they do it clean. They'll target the weakest, something sick, old, or small, and run it down, trapping it in a corner. Then, they drive it straight to the alpha. That poor animal won't even see it coming. One moment, it hears a growl, and the next, its throat is gone. Quick, efficient. This wasn't that. What we found wasn't an attack for survival. It was a slaughter. It looked like something had torn into a den of deer. 3, maybe 4 of them. Coyotes won't attack a den, and wolves know better than to try. It's too risky, too much of a fight. But here, there were just pieces. A head over there, a leg in the bushes, a torso ripped apart. Predators don't do that. They don't waste meat. Whatever did this didn't do it for food. It did it for fun. At first, we didn't know that. All we saw was a massacre and figured it was something we'd have to handle. I remember my dad telling me to go home, thinking it might have been a pack of feral dogs. But there was no way I was leaving him, and I damn sure wasn't walking 2 miles back through those woods alone with nothing but a .22 and a pocket knife. I was only 13 then, and the .22 was the only gun I could handle. Dad had the shotgun, and even he wasn't going into those woods without it. It took some convincing, but eventually we started tracking whatever had done this. It wasn't hard. The blood trail was impossible to miss. Either that thing had wounded a deer that got away, or it had dragged its prey for over a mile. I couldn't tell. All I know is that I'd never seen my dad scared before that night. The deeper we went, the stranger things became. We started hearing noises, sounds I've never heard before, not in all my years of hunting and wandering through the woods. Screams. Not just one kind, but many. Deep, guttural roars mixed with high-pitched wails. Foxes, rabbits, raccoons. It was like the whole forest was crying out in terror. It was getting harder to stay calm. Keep in mind, this was around midnight, maybe 1 a.m. Except for the occasional fox or some birds, the forest should have been still, asleep. But that night, it was anything but quiet. Everything was awake, and everything was moving. I'll never forget the sight of flocks of birds flying straight into trees, desperate to escape. We stumbled upon a pack of coyotes and almost shot at them, thinking they were what we'd been tracking. But then we noticed something strange. They weren't hunting us. They were running. They charged past us without even a glance. Moments later, a group of deer followed, then rabbits, squirrels, foxes, even a couple of wild hogs. Predators and prey alike, all running together. That's when it hit me. These animals were supposed to be eating each other. They didn't care about the natural order that night. The only thing they cared about was getting out of there. We should have put it together right then. Whatever we were tracking, it wasn't something we were supposed to find. It wasn't something we could kill, but we didn't leave. Looking back, I don't know why. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was my dad's nature. He wasn't the type to back away from trouble. And knowing what I did about his time in the war, my instinct was to stay close to him, no matter what. Eventually, we came to an open valley. It was usually a soy field, but it wasn't in season, so the land was just flat, barren dirt. That's where we saw the tracks. The ground was trampled in places. Animals fleeing the forest had stampeded over it, but there was one section where no animal had dared to step. The trail of blood leading to the tracks. It was as if they'd left it untouched, like a warning. The tracks themselves were shallow, like whatever had made them didn't weigh much, maybe 100 pounds at most. But that didn't mean anything. I knew better. A bobcat weighing half that had once nearly ripped my throat out. Weight doesn't matter when something's fast and impossible to hit. We kept following the tracks, and it didn't take long to find where they led. There was this old, abandoned schoolhouse sitting on top of a hill. Half of it had been torn apart by a tornado years ago, and no one had lived there since. Occasionally, we'd find homeless folks sheltering inside, or addicts looking for a hidden spot to shoot up. For a brief moment, we thought maybe that's what this was, just some poor soul out of their mind on drugs. But that idea didn't last long. When we were about 50 yards away, we heard it, a noise that sent chills down my spine. It was a screeching sound, but not just one noise. It was layered, like two sounds happening at the same time. One was a high-pitched screech, and the other was a low, guttural growl. They shouldn't have fit together, but somehow they did. As we crept closer, maybe 20 yards out, I heard something else. It was unlike anything I'd ever heard before, like the sound of paper being torn apart, mixed with the rhythmic swish of water being sloshed in a bucket. Dad stopped and knelt down, motioning for me to do the same. In a whisper, he told me, "Stay behind me, we're about to corner it. Whatever it is, it'll fight back." He paused, then added, "Especially if it's a predator." By now, we could tell from the tracks that it was just one animal. Dad leaned in close and whispered his theory. Probably a feral dog. Might be rabid. The plan was simple, but dangerous. We'd sneak up on it while it was eating, and Dad would shoot it. Then he'd keep shooting until it stopped moving. If for any reason it got past him, my job was to shoot or stab it to get it off him. I didn't like the plan, but I nodded. We moved in slowly, quietly. Dad took the lead, shotgun raised, while I followed just a step behind and to his side so I could see what we were dealing with. I wish I hadn't looked. To this day, I wish I hadn't seen it. It was crouched over a carcass, tearing off chunks of flesh and tossing aside the pieces it didn't want. It wasn't eating like an animal trying to survive. No, it was something else. Something wrong. There was blood everywhere, splattered across the bricks, glistening under the pale moonlight. The creature was crouched there, its form eerily human, but unmistakably wrong. Its skin was a pale, sickly white, and though it had arms and legs like a human, it sat hunched over like a monkey. Its hands weren't normal. They were elongated, with unnaturally long fingers ending in sharp, curved claws. My dad froze, his grip on the shotgun tightening. He wasn't about to fire at what might be a person. Instead, he cleared his throat, trying to get its attention, maybe scare it off. That's when everything stopped. I swear the entire forest fell silent, not a single sound. It wasn't just quiet, it was unnatural silence, the kind that makes your ears ring. It lasted maybe 2 seconds, but it felt like forever. Then it turned around. The creature let out a piercing, shrill cry that cut through the silence like a knife. Before I could react, it leaped at my dad. He got off a single shot, but if he hit it, the thing didn't care. It was on him in an instant, tearing into him with those claws. I raised my .22 and fired, point blank. I emptied 5 rounds into it, but it barely seemed to notice. There was hardly any blood. I panicked, swinging the gun like a club and smashing it against the thing's back and head. Still, it didn't even flinch. It was like I wasn't even there. All it cared about was my dad. I watched, helpless, as it ripped into him. Its claws shredded through his torso, tearing away chunks of flesh. Then it moved upward, tearing off his throat, his nose, and his eyes. It scalped him with one swift motion. But it wasn't done. The thing started digging deeper, ripping apart his jaw and pulling out the small bones and flesh beneath it. Then it moved to his ribs, tearing them apart like they were nothing. I don't remember exactly what happened next. It's all a blur. Somehow, my dad's knife ended up lodged in the thing's shoulder. The next thing I knew, I had my dad on my back, and I was running faster than I'd ever had in my life. I could hear it following me, crashing through the woods. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. Eventually, I found myself in a different part of the woods, far from where we'd started, opposite the ones we'd been in before. I sprinted toward my landlord's house, barely a half mile away. Behind me, the creature's screeches pierced the night, each sound more unnerving than the last. Tree branches cracked and crashed to the ground, like something was swinging an axe at every trunk I passed. The noises were relentless, echoing louder and closer with every step I took. But I didn't dare look back. Finally, my foot hit gravel, and I stumbled forward, sprawling face first into the driveway. I looked up, gasping for air, and saw my landlord and his buddies gathered around a campfire, beers in hand. I screamed for help, barely able to get the words out between sobs. They came running over, and I begged them to call an ambulance. My landlord stared at me, his face pale, and I'll never forget what he said next. "What's that on your back?" he asked, his voice low and shaky. Before I could answer, his expression shifted to horror. He was staring at what was left of my dad. I looked down and realized I'd been carrying him this whole time. The shredded remains of his torso hung over my shoulder, still wrapped in one of those old flannel shirts he always wore. His head was barely intact, and everything below the waist was just gone. Suddenly, the creature's screeching rang out again, louder and closer than before. My landlord grabbed me, yanking my dad's body off my back and throwing it to the ground. I fought him, sobbing, desperate to believe there was still a chance to save him. But deep down, I knew it was too late. My dad had been gone long before I even picked him up. The landlord lifted me like I weighed nothing and dragged me inside the house, slamming the door behind us. His buddies followed, scrambling to lock every door and window while grabbing whatever guns they could find. "What happened? What happened out there?" the landlord demanded, but I couldn't speak. I couldn't explain it. All I could do was cry. He pieced together enough from my rambling and the blood on me to know something horrifying was out there, something dangerous. Every light in the house was turned on, and someone called the cops. They said it would be 15 minutes before anyone could get there. We all crowded by the window, looking out toward the fire pit. That's when we saw it. It stepped into the firelight, its pale, hunched form casting grotesque shadows across the yard. "What the hell is that?" one of the men muttered. "It looks like an ape," another whispered. Before anyone could say more, something smashed through the window. We all jumped, spinning around, guns raised. But it wasn't the creature. It was the landlord's dog. Or, more accurately, what was left of it. Its lifeless body lay in a pool of blood on the floor, missing its head and legs. Panic set in as we pushed whatever we could find, couches, TVs, tables, against the doors and windows. The creature was still outside, screeching and banging on the walls. Then we heard it. The sound of metal and glass being torn apart came from the garage. The garage doors were open. One of the men shouted. We pushed a couch in front of the door leading to the garage, hoping it would hold. The noise in the garage grew louder, metal screeching, glass shattering, but then suddenly it stopped. It wasn't silent, not like before, but eerily quiet. We could still hear it moving, shifting around, but it felt like it was waiting, watching. And then, the tension in the room was suffocating. Everyone was talking in hushed tones, checking their guns, making sure they were ready. Someone handed me a pistol, and I barely had time to cock the hammer when the sound of shattering glass cut through the air. It came from upstairs. Then we heard the screech again. But this time it was different. It didn't echo. It didn't fade into the distance. It was inside the house. Panic set in as we rushed to the single door that led upstairs. We reached it just in time, right as the thing slammed into the other side. The door cracked open slightly, and we all threw ourselves against it, forcing it closed. Its hands pushed through the gap, claws scraping wildly. Someone with a shotgun didn't hesitate. They pressed the barrel against its wrist and pulled the trigger. The blast echoed through the house, and its hand came clean off. For a moment, we thought we had the upper hand, but we were wrong. The creature let out a horrifying guttural scream, angrier than anything I've ever heard, and started pushing harder. Its claws tore into the wood, splinters flying everywhere. The door was buckling under the pressure, and we all knew it wouldn't hold for long. Someone shouted, "Keep your heads down." Before I could process what they meant, the top half of the door exploded in a deafening blast. My ears rang as the room filled with smoke and splinters. 2 or 3 of the men had fired their shotguns at once, obliterating the top of the door. And then, the thing was gone. I don't know where it went. None of us did. The house fell eerily silent except for the ringing in my ears. We stayed by what was left of the door, guns drawn, until the police finally showed up. By then, the sun was rising, and I was still glued to the spot, gripping the broken wood as if it was the only thing keeping me alive. The police found me like that. They had to pry me away from the door and take me to the hospital. I stayed there for a while, physically fine but unable to talk. A lot of people tried to get me to open up, but I couldn't. Not for a long time. The first thing I asked him was what the police had said about what happened. He sighed, took a long sip, and finally told me. They called it a wild animal attack, he said. They said it was probably a wolf, he told me, or maybe a bear that wandered north. Something natural, something easy to explain. I couldn't believe it. What about the hand? I asked him, desperate for an answer. He froze, the color draining from his face. That hand never made it back to the station, he said quietly. The officer who had it, his car swerved off the road straight into a tree. He died on impact, and the hand, it was gone. The official story was that an animal must have taken it. The cops, when they even acknowledged the hand at all, dismissed it as a bear paw that just looked a little too human. That was the last real conversation I had with the landlord. Not long after I left for basic training, he disappeared. No trace. The local authorities claimed he owed money to the wrong people and skipped town, but I didn't buy it. It didn't feel that simple. I never went back to those woods. Not then, not ever. I wouldn't go back, even if I had the entire U.S. Army at my back. That was my father's story about the thing in the woods, the rake, the skinwalker, whatever it was. I still don't know what to make of it. As I grew older, though, and after my mother passed away, I noticed something change in my father. It was like he had nothing left to lose. He stopped caring about himself, about anything. And then one day, he decided to go back into those woods. I begged him not to, but he didn't listen. He never came back. The FBI showed up, put on their little show, and went through the motions, but I knew they weren't really looking. They never found him, and I don't think they ever really wanted to.